All right, it's time to begin. Find your pew. First Kings chapter 17 we are in. Still looking at Elijah. Last week we left off where Elijah went to Ahab and told him that it wasn't going to rain, there's going to be a drought. And we mentioned the fact that the real issue that's before us here in this text that leads up to the battle on Mount Carmel is who's the real God? Is it the God of Israel or is it the gods of the Canaanites? And so this was a direct assault against Baal worship, the Canaanite god, because he was the god of the storm, the god of the thunderbolt. And so for Elijah to go to King Ahab in North Israel, they've gone into idolatry. Ahab's turned out to be very wicked, and he's done more wickedness than all of those before him. And even in doing that and choosing to go that way, he married Jezebel, which just kind of amplified the wicked path that North Israel's chosen, because Jezebel's going to bring the Canaanite gods. And we'll see a little later that she is surrounded by prophets of Asherah who wait on her every need and all of this. So it's a terrible situation. And so then we have Elijah who shows up. Nothing about his background. We're only told where he was, where he lived. And he shows up and tells Ahab that it's not going to rain until, God gives me the word. And so that's a direct assault. There's going to be a drought. And so you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of angst in Israel in regard to these Canaanite gods, because Baal's not going to be able to bring rain upon the land. And so God's going to make them suffer because of their choice to reject him. So after that confrontation with Ahab, God tells Ahab to go to a particular river and stay there, and God's going to provide for him bread and meat, and it's going to be the DoorDash or Uber to going to bring him meals. It's going to be a raven. That's what it was back then. So these ravens come, and God providentially takes care of Elijah. Well, we have the first problem that's taken care of. Elijah does what God tells him to do. And so you remember what Elijah's name means? Anybody? Everybody? All at once. What does Elijah mean? My God is, you can say the Lord, but it's the personal name of God, Yahweh. So my God is Yahweh, as opposed to Baal and Asherah and all these other Canaanite gods. That's what his name means. So he obeys God, and God takes care of him. But it ends, the part that we left off with last time is you look at verse 7 of 1 Kings 17, and it says, after a while, the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. And so I mentioned, there's always there always seems to be a challenge, over the hill, right? Everything looks good. God's taking care of Elijah with the ravens. It's, he's providentially providing. Then the water runs out and you got another problem, another issue. Well, I think this is one of the purposes of giving us the story and ministry of Elijah and the encounters that he has, is that there's always going to be issues, are there not? I don't know, one of us can say, man, everything has worked out perfectly as planned, according to, my desire in all ways. Well, No, it hadn't been like that. It never will be like that. There will always be another obstacle over the hill. And so we have an uh-oh moment, which I think is intentional by the writer who's telling these things. What's going to happen now? And so from the reader, as we read this, we're kind of already prepped. Well, God's going to take care of him. You know, that's at least what I think the reader would be thinking, not that, uh-oh, there's a crisis. But that's how we think sometimes. Uh-oh, there's a crisis. What are we going to do? Well, I think one of the lessons from this is, let's wait on God, let's be patient, and let's trust in his provisions, in his direction, in his providential care. So we go, since the water has run out. You might say, well, why didn't God keep the water in the brook? Well, I don't know, there's a drought in the land. And so people are suffering, but he's taking this prophet, and he tells the prophet to go north into the land of the Sidonians. You know, Tyre and Sidon are way up north. This is where Jezebel's father is, okay? Being a chief pagan, fanatical pagan up there. And he sends him up there because he's prepared a widow to take care of him. And so this is where we pick up the reading here. Now, who would have thought that, right? In regard to overcoming this problem with the water running dry, who would have thought that he'd be up there where Jezebel's, daddy lives, and the heart of paganism, and God taking care of him by a widow who at first is a pagan. There's stranger things, there's even a TV show called Stranger Things. This is strange. So let's begin reading. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold. Now, the Hebrew word here, behold, is it's unless it's in a prophetic. Well, even if it's in a prophetic, behold, the days are coming. It's a term of immediacy. It's something that this is going to happen, and so he's prepping Elijah to go, and so behold, you're going to be looking for what I'm telling you. These things are going to happen, and he says, go to Sidon and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Okay, this is interesting. Did God come to the widow and say, I'm sending you a prophet? Or is God commanding the circumstances in which Elijah is going to find himself and the widow is going to find himself? She's going to be ending up, this is sort of prophetic, doing God's bidding. God has used unbelievers throughout history to do his will. Can you think of some? Who has he used? Some notable people. He's even called some unbelievers and pagans his servant, in that they're going to do his bidding. Nebuchadnezzar's one. Cyrus was one. He's called actually a servant of God. So God in his providence uses situations and people, influences them to follow through with his will. Yes?
You think that, in everybody's lives and all these stories describe, God is opportunities. I mean, and he's not manipulating the scene, but he puts people in these places, and sometimes we have stuff happen to us, and we're like,
Well, it's like God knows. It's like Pharaoh. The statement said, I raised him up. Well, God knew there was going to be a Pharaoh, and he used him.
But I think we have some responsibility
To have our eyes open.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah. Look for what God's going to do in the midst of the challenge. I think that's very insightful for us to contemplate. So he says, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he arose, Elijah, okay, he arose and he went to Zarephath. Now the thing is, I want you to think about it. He knows he's going into the land of the Sidonians, Tyre and Sidon, and all that. And he knows, Jezebel's there. He knows Ahab's relationship that he has there. It's just ironic that that's where he goes. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. Okay, so this widow's, out there by the gate, and this is to indicate she's poor. And we'll find out this as well. And so she's gathering sticks, and he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. Okay, nothing is said that he knows who she is necessarily. He sees this widow, and he's asking for a drink of water. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, as the Lord your God lives. This indicates that she's recognized something about Elijah, that he's not from the territory. Maybe she recognizes his garb, that he's unusual, and recognizes that he's a Jew. But she says, what? Your God. Okay? He says, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and what? Die. So this is her last meal. All right. So the prophet said, bring me something to drink and bring me some bread in your hand. So she's got the wood, she has some flour, some little oil, and that's all she has, and she's preparing. And you have to wonder what the state of the widow is in. I mean, she's at her she's at the end of the rope, so to speak. And that's the situation in which she's in when Elijah talks to her. Okay? So what a request, right? I thought it might be a little bit different. We might say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was your last meal. And then the prophet would come and help and assist, and let me carry that wood for you, and I'll go out and, I'll pick the sticks up. That'd be a true servant, wouldn't it? Why such a direct statement to this poor widow? You find it a little harsh or not? What's your thoughts?
Maybe he, when he approached her, maybe he did that to see if she was the widow that was going to be helped.
Maybe, yeah. We're not told. And so this is going to be a test for her. I think you're right in that observation. There's going to be a test, and it's going to be a test of faith on her part. Do what? His part too. So this is her last meal, and she's going to end up, if we'll notice in verse 13, and Elijah said to her, do not fear. I read that a lot in the Bible, don't you? Do not fear. He says, go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring to me, and afterward make something for yourself and your son. I mean, this is awful. You know, it's so selfish. Keep on reading. He says, "For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth." Now, that's a promise that he's making to her, but she's got to what? She's got to believe it. She's got to trust it. So here she is in a crisis, and I want you to think about this, because I think this is a principle that's been established that goes throughout Old Testament and New Testament. Who comes first? Who's first in our lives? Who's first? Huh? God is. God's first, right? Kingdom's first. Do we say that intellectually, or do we have the conviction of that in our faith? It's easy to say, but it's difficult if our faith isn't true to trust in the promises of God. When you're at your wits' end. Is that true? It is, isn't it? So this is something. Now, I don't know how God is going to work things out, but I do recall a promise that's been given to us. I think it's Romans 5. Tell me when to stop. 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do it again. Tell me what's 5, 6, 7, 8, verse 28. What does it say? Somebody look it up. I'll start it for you. You know what it is. All things work together for good to those who love God, who are the called according to his purpose. It's going to work out some way, somehow. It may not seem that way at the moment. I mean, particularly when you have a crisis like the widow of Zarephath at this time. So she's got to trust. She's a pagan. And Elijah has told her what Yahweh, the Lord, has said. Okay? Well, maybe she's so desperate she'd believe anybody. You know? Huh? How do I know that she's a widow? Well, I don't think that he necessarily knew who she was. But she's out there gathering sticks, and the writer informs us of that. But there's a lot that Elijah probably doesn't know, so he's just looking for that widow that God wants him to meet up with. And lo and behold, providentially, there she is, right?
Did widows wear certain garments?
Well,
That could indicate to him that she was a widow.
yeah, possibly. I do know that in Israel, that seemed to be the case. Pagans somewhat of a different matter because of their religious rites and things, but we know she's poor and she's outside the gate, so there's probably, signs that she's a widow.
He probably fairly quickly picked up on it because of what she said.
Yeah.
Go and prepare for me and
My son, right.
Doesn't mention anything about it.
Right. But how did he know, at the, prior to that? Well, I don't think necessarily he did until he started asking her this question. Good question, thanks. He says, verse 15, bring me bread and water. And she went and did as Elijah said. And she and he and her household. Now, to me, that probably includes other relatives. They're all probably poor. But it seems to be more the household from the Old Testament point of view, and when you read it, and even the New Testament, it can include, much more people. Usually with those who are of some means, it would include their servants, and other people, relatives, even it could include close friends. But there's others that are going to be, who are going to benefit from what God is going to providentially do for them. So her household for many, many days. The jar of flour was not spent. Can you think that? You go to the jar and you keep getting flour and you keep getting oil and it's just always full. I mean, what a change in attitude, knowing that you're being taken care of, right? What a change in attitude. Yeah, really, in the desert and everything. But the point of all of this is stressing something about God. What is it? And our understanding of Him. Even in the harshest situation, the desert, even in the, the context in which we find ourselves, and at the end of our rope, it's always a call of faith to trust God. Trust Him. It seems like a trite thing to say, doesn't it? I mean, but it's not. When you have these promises and these examples in the Bible, and particularly in the New Testament, and even what Jesus says, don't worry about what? Clothing, food, and shelter, and all these kinds of things. It's a constant reminder that God takes care of His children. And I don't know how He's going to do it. I mean, I've been at that point at times. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, but it happens.
Scott, to be put in her situation, she's desperate when he arrives.
Yes.
She's in a society that worships pagan gods, and they've done nothing.
They've done nothing.
And then this stranger out of nowhere comes and asks her to trust somebody that's, a God that's unknown to her.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's a big leap of faith.
It is.
To do what she did.
So she does it, and she's rewarded for it. And it all happened, it says in the last part of that verse, according to the word of the Lord. Now that's the emphasis, the word of the Lord that He spoke by who? Elijah. So what Elijah is saying is coming from God. Elijah's just the voice. He's the prophet. He's, as the prophets are often called, a man of God. So that's the first miracle here in this particular context. So we've gone from Elijah confronting Ahab and then going back over the Jordan River, and he's taken care of by ravens, okay? After the water runs dry after a while, God sends him up north to the Sidonians, to Zarephath, and he meets a widow, and the widow takes care of him. But while she's taking care of him, God is taking care of who? The widow. Now, there's something interesting. Look at Matthew 10, about verse 41. I think it's 10. Yeah, Matthew 10. Notice verse 40. This is Jesus talking to his disciples. He says, and those who are following him, and he's mentioning that he's come not to bring peace in this context, but a sword. He's going to cause division because there's going to be some people who will accept what he's teaching and says, and there's going to be others who will reject what he says. But verse 40 is interesting. It says, whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet, because he is a prophet, will receive a prophet's what? A prophet's reward. And the one who receives it receives a righteous person, because he is a righteous person, will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of those little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly I say unto you, he will by no means lose his reward. So, I mean, maybe this is a sort of a foreshadowing to what's the principle here of how God blesses those who provide, take care of, look over his children, his disciples, his prophets, his people. There's been occasions where outsiders have come to protect God's people. I remember I had a good friend when I was preaching in Fruitvale. There was a missionary, Larry Fryer, who's a good friend of ours, who sort of worked out of the congregation where we were, but he was a missionary to Sri Lanka. And there's two warring groups that are a part of Sri Lanka, and they both hate each other. And there's a church that was established that he worked with, and one of these groups came with machetes to the church building, was about to kill everybody there who was a Christian worshiping at this building. I mean, they came as a horde of people, faces covered. They had, their swords and everything. They were coming. The other warring group learned about it, and they formed a bastion, a barrier around that church. They were not Christians, but they appreciated the people who were Christians. And when they came out, rushed out to defend this church, the other group departed, gave them a message. And I always found that to be very interesting. But there's been at times where, even in the book of Acts, where Romans have come to the aid of, and others who weren't believers, but appreciated and respected the people who were Christians, came to their aid, even helped them, assisted them at times. So it's not unusual for this kind of thing to happen. And I see it here when you look at Elijah's interaction with this widow here.
One interesting thing that happened in the Cold War was that there was a member of the church working with the brethren in Poland. And it turned out, he's Polish himself, he was he's a childhood friend of Jaruzelski, who was at the time the leader of Poland, military. And they were going to be cracking down on Solidarity, which is a Roman Catholic organization. This member of the church intervened on behalf of brethren in Poland and got them exempt by the communist government from any kind of persecution.
Yeah. Yeah, God works in mysterious ways for sure. Yep. So after this, you think, okay, this is taken care of, right? So everything's lovely and everything's good, but there's also an uh-oh moment, right? There's going to be another situation right around the corner, even for this widow. If you think it was bad that she was at her wit's end and, poor and giving her last meal to the prophet, and then was rewarded by her faithfulness, something tragic is going to happen in her household. And it will put her faith even more to the test. And so these events that we're reading are not only testing faith, but they're growing faith. They're growing one's faith to even a deeper level to trust God. So let's read verse 17. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said her first reaction, which is typical of anything bad that's happening, what do people normally do? They blame God about it, right? I mean, that's a lot of times what happens. Why is God doing this? Your God, is judging me. All these kinds of things that people begin to think because of the crisis of the situation. And I'm not saying the situation is not bad. It is for her. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." So she thinks God is now punishing her because Elijah has brought attention upon her, and she feels her guilt of sin, whatever it is, and that she's being punished as a result of it. And it wouldn't happen if the preacher didn't come. If the prophet didn't come, if the word of God did not come, she would not be losing her son. Her sins would be unknown or not detected, and none of this would happen. Now it sounds, this is how people think. Do you agree or not? Do you agree that's how people think? Okay. So, verse 19 says, "And he said to her, 'Give me your son.' And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged." So he was staying there, and he was in an upper chamber, and laid him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" What do you think about Elijah saying that?
He knew it didn't look good.
He had a question.
Yeah. So shouldn't he sort of temper his little attitude in talking to God that way?
A difference from all of us.
Yeah. Have you read the book of Psalms, the collections of Psalms, and how God's people sometimes argue with God or say things to God? And we would say, "Don't say that." Or we'd move out and say, "Let lightning strike you." Despair is the fool of the devil. That's a good tool. You think God can handle it? Yeah.
Asking questions,
Yeah. Yeah.
asking questions of God is never wrong.
No, never is. And it's not Elijah showing lack of faith. He just doesn't understand why this is happening, And I think we have those thoughts as well. And it doesn't mean we're losing our faith. It's that, we'd like a heads up maybe, or maybe done in a different way, or show me how to handle this particular thing. Do what? Lose plus and in the plan.
And don't we too often forget that Satan's involved?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not ignorant of his devices, the New Testament says.
Job never seems to acknowledge that all through that book.
Yeah. But there is an enemy who takes advantage. I'm thinking about the 2 Corinthians when one was evidently disciplined and had repented and was, sorrowful. And Paul encourages the congregation to reaffirm their love because we're not ignorant how God or how Satan can use this situation, probably to forever discourage this individual, to feel like an outcast, not accepted. So Paul really urges that the church surround this individual.
And Paul also emphasizes that the last enemy that shall be exposed is death.
Yeah.
Death is not the friend of God. It's
Yeah,
the enemy of God.
yeah, that's true. So Elijah takes the child and he prays. He cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord, my God, let this child's life come into him again. And the Lord, you find this interesting? What does the Lord do? What? Heard. My translation says listened. Heard. He listened. Do you know that word to hear, to listen, is also translated in several places as obey, to hearken? It's a word that's used that way. In other words, God responds to the prayer of Elijah. He says he listened to the voice of Elijah. Who has time to listen to one single human being with all the people that are living, past, present, and future, who will? Doesn't God have better things to do than to, focus on this one individual going around and this one widow in Zarephath in a pagan countryside? But he listened to Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, see, your son lives. And the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. What are we to take from that statement of the widow? I thought she already believed. Didn't she already have a belief? Yeah. So what does it say about our faith? Can our faith become deeper? I mean, do we reach like faith and then that's it? There's a certain level. I think faith continues. It's the same thing in John 2 when Jesus turns the water into wine. When the disciples saw that, and I remember they've been with Jesus, they know who he is, but when they saw it, they believed in him. But they were already believers. How did they believe in him? What does that mean?
I think the trials that you go through, that God puts you through, it tempers your faith. It makes it evolve to what
Yeah.
he wants it to be for you, because he knows there's other circumstances that are coming in your life that you're going to need deeper faith. So he tempers it and anneals your faith to mold it into what it's supposed to be for you.
Yeah. So there are, if there's degrees of anything, there's degrees of faith. In other words, God is growing us by each of these situations that looks from a human perspective as being, a lost cause. God injects hope. He challenges us. And these events and stories are meant to convey to us that God is true to who he is, faithful to his people, and he provides. So, yes.
I was going to say, kind of what David said,
Uh-huh.
the tools of the devil. When you're put in these circumstances, it's easy to despair and doubt God's plan. And you have to believe that the devil is on the other side using those same tools.
Yeah.
And you have a choice to make. And I think that circumstances push you one way or another. And I think that the stronger your faith is, the more willing that you're to trust in God's plan and continue with it, even though you're in a moment of despair because things are so bad.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's also, Jesus refers to this event. And, but before we read that, I want us to think about that son who has been raised, when Elijah finally leaves that area and goes back, and goes up to Mount Carmel, and then we don't see Elijah anymore, who's remaining in that household? That child who was raised from the dead, that serves as a what to those around him? Huh? Yeah, a reminder, an object lesson. Okay? It's no different than, you remember when Jesus cast out the legions from the guy who's demon possessed? And he wanted to go with Jesus, to be his disciples, to follow him. And Jesus told him to do what? You go home. And remember, that's also a Gentile territory. And you tell people what great things God has done for you. So you go home, objectless. He leaves something there. Something's left there. In my doctoral class, there's a funny story, and it's not really funny, but it almost seems like, why did he record this? Why is this there? But you remember when Paul was preaching in Acts 20, and he sort of went long, and there was this young man in a window up above named Eutychus, and he was sitting there, and then he fell asleep, and what happened? He fell out of the window. And he died. This is a person who went to church that fell out of the window and he died. So I asked my students, why is this here? What could be the interpretive value? Is it to suggest that preachers preach too long, don't preach too long, because you might hurt church members? I mean, you might fall asleep and hit the pew in front of you. I might knock you out, What's the purpose? Let's go over there and look at it first.
God's with you even in your weakest moment.
Yeah, that could be something. I don't think that's it, though. Let's see.
Luke and Paul must have had a very, very close relationship for him to include this.
Yeah, Paul probably didn't want to include it. Don't use that. But maybe he did because of what Paul ultimately did. So we're in Acts chapter 20, and let's see. Okay, here we go. Verse 7. Eutychus raised from the dead. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day. He prolonged his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered, and a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. And being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms said, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them a long while until daybreak, and so departed, and they took the youth away alive and were not a little comforted. They were greatly comforted. It's funny. This is how it's expressed in Greek, actually. Not a little comfort, not a little angry, means they were really angry or really comforted. We don't talk like that, but that's the way it's translated here in the version I'm using. So they have Eutychus. What a story. Can you see the parallels between what Paul did and what Elijah did? Yeah, in some instances, we see not all. There were several raised from the dead, but not all. So my question is, why include this event? Now get off the preacher, because that's not what it is.
Thankfully, we don't have 3-story church.
Yeah. Why? Paul will never see these folks again. He'll never see them again. But what has he left? He left Eutychus alive. The widow's not ever going to see Elijah, have that close contact and everything. He's going to be gone after, Mount Carmel, and when he selects his replacement, Elisha. What is God leaving? He's leaving object lessons. He's leaving something for us to see. What has God left for us? I mean, think of the converted people. Object lessons. They're people that remind us. So God's still doing that kind of thing and giving us object lessons. Answered prayers, a change of event, conversion. There's object lessons. The memorial supper that we gather. These are meant to be what? They're to remind us.
We're human beings,
Yeah.
Especially Southern people, we tell stories.
Yeah.
Okay? And so make sure you end it where it's a good story.
Yeah. But I'm sure, as David said, Luke and Paul traveled a lot together, and Luke might have been his private physician too. But I'm sure there's a story there, jokes. But the outcome of Eutychus being raised from the dead is certainly for us to recognize that God is real. These are a call to attention, call to remembrance, call to praise God.
Could that influence the way our auditoriums are designed?
Absolutely.
We don't have large windows near the view.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know, David. You're taking it a little bit farther. But anyway, any questions, observations? Anyway, we'll look at another encounter that comes up that will really challenge Ahab, and then we'll see Elijah under some duress. So thanks. That's it.